I can only applaud mistakes for one reason. You tried.
Mm.
Yeah, all right, let's do this. Hey, what's up, everyone? Ghazali Orella here with the Gomaluku Live Q&A show, episode number 13. Lucky number 13, I would say. It's not an unlucky number or whatever you want to call it. I'm so grateful to have Johanna with me. Johanna, when was it that we got to know of, like, not got to know each other, but like when was it Pyramid Forum in 2000 and what? Help me out a little bit.
10 or 12, 13, around these times. I've attended like 3 or 4 times.
Right. You were mostly active, or what I remember from you, the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, obviously, helping out with everything. And yeah, that's when I got to know you, started to having talks incidentally. And then this year, obviously, with COVID, yeah, we had some more conversations. Yeah, because of your not only your history, your background, your field of work, what you're doing right now, because you got to explain to me at some point, like you're a trainer and consultant in open science communication, background in evolution and development biology. And wow, that's an amazing doctorate that you have in the as well. So that's going to be awesome. So yeah, you have a lot of experience covering a lot of fields. So yeah, having you on the show was a kind of a no-brainer to me, as it is, yeah, the idea to learn more about what you do, pick your brain a little bit, and then in the process, answer questions that the community, the people that are watching, listening, have sent in. They have sent in a couple of questions. You've seen them already. I'm very sure that they'll be fun to answer, which we'll get into probably like in the second half, kind of part of the conversation. But before we start off, kick off with everything, Johanna, what's most interesting to me, and we spoke about this offline, is the like who you were growing up, where you grew up, because in my experience, from all the conversations that I've had, is like usually what you do right now has already started to emerge a little bit when you were a kid. Some elements of that, some aspects of that. So if you could please give people like the 5 to 6 minutes background story of Johanna, and then we'll obviously go into the whole breadth of knowledge and experience that you have built up so far.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much for having me in this show, and it's a real honor on multiple levels, which probably will unfold as we speak. So thanks again. Yeah, basically to put myself in the picture is, as you rightly say, I think it surely arose, what I'm doing today, or took its roots in my childhood, and the way, well, the political situation was at the time. So I was born in East Germany, so in a divided country. There was a war. Our family was separated into both Germanys, basically. We were sort of privileged as East Germans because we had close connections to our West German family members, especially the sister of my grandma, and both were daughters to my grandma, who sacrificed her life for the greater cause. She was killed by the Nazis for rescuing thousands of Jews and Germans and people who wanted to escape the situation under the Third Reich. And she was killed shortly before the end of the war. And so this was always the story of our family as I grew up, that we were kind of the good Germans when it came to talk about German recent history. And as a kid, I always felt safe, and I always made us and myself feel good until I started questioning what that really means. To sacrifice not only your own life, but also the security and the security and of the whole family and friends and colleagues and neighbors and everyone around you, to put that on the line for the greater good. And and that shook me when I was a teenager, when I finally realized, what would I have done? Or I asked myself, and I'm not sure I can give you an answer. I just know that this fight for justice that ran in our family got under my skin. And not only my skin, I think many of our family have searched and found a cause they can pursue in their lifetime to make the world a better place. And some of that sounds cheesy, but I think this is what those of us who kind of want to work also professionally towards making this world a better place, what we basically do as a profession. And we kind of search for career steps for making it possible to align our value system with the way to make money for our livelihoods. And wherever in the world we are. So there was I haven't told this family story in the past several years, because I was busy working, and I've reflected on it a lot in my 20s, and still a lot in my early 30s, and now I just crossed 40, a year and a half ago. So now I consider myself, I also feel more settled in what I do, and I think I found my mission in life for myself. And I think it's also as an individual can say, this is what I really want to contribute to humanity, throughout my livelihood. It doesn't have to be a global case, it doesn't have to be to try and save the world, but which desperately needs saving these days, we're all aware of. But I mean, for me, it wasn't a more global sphere. For my father, my late father, he died a couple of years ago, but for him, it was his closest family and friends. And we were, for the longest time, especially when I was a teenager in my 20s, we didn't understand each other. I mean, we still love each other, but he didn't understand how I would care so much for people who I don't even know personally. And I was like, how can you, I wouldn't call it ignorance, but how can it not touch you as it touches me when you hear about, human rights violations in wherever in the world? And it does, but, other things were more important to him for whatever reason, for reasons of his upbringing, probably. Because he was born right after the war, and he's probably seen how important it is to make sure that the closest to you are safe and happy. And he also had kids, which I have dogs, which is also cool. And I think also perspectives change once you have your own family. For some more so, for some less, but yeah, all of these things. So yeah, this is, I think I'm going beyond those 5-6 minutes.
No, that's okay.
To make a turn is, so I was I think I was also a passionate scientist. As a kid also, I grew up with my cousin. Children were playing in the woods and on the fields, and we were always close to nature. And we're also passionate about animals and animal rights. And I was kind of an activist for animal rights and human rights as a teenager. Kids that teenagers do, stuff that teenagers do. And then and then I chose biology as a field of study for uni, which was natural. There was no other option in my world. So of course it had to be biology. My mom is a medical doctor, and I was like, no, I cannot cut people open. And it's cool that she can, but it's not my thing. And biology was fascinating to me because understanding, the word biology literally means the study of life, and what more beautiful can it be? And then I pursued the studies, and then I realized that much of biology is actually killing, and that went against my value system. I always felt uncomfortable in university, and then also during my PhD, a few years down the line, I was like, why are we killing animals and plants and taking things apart to understand? Isn't there a less invasive way? So yeah, and this is basically also what I'm trying to pursue now as a trainer and consultant and teach, not literally teacher, but yeah, as I educate people and courses that I give, to kind of trigger and sensitize for less invasion, more inclusion, more diversity, and how can we achieve that? And it's certainly not easy, and I also put myself out there and I question myself a lot, and I try and reflect on myself and my actions and my words. And this is why I'm like often also in my own way, but I think I've learned to be my own way in a constructive way nowadays. Because reflecting on yourself and your actions too much can be self-destructing. And I've been there also where I question myself to a degree where I wouldn't dare to take another step anymore, or where I was kind of feel trapped within myself and question, a lot of things that I think many of us do at some point. Maybe it's also part of the journey. Yeah. And then to make a shortcut, so why am I so intrigued by an Indigenous cause is, of course, I was fascinated as a kid by the stories of the Native Americans and what everybody's basically easily confronted with in Western societies. And then I dove and I collected and read a lot of books, and philosophies were natural not only to me, but everybody worships these stories, and they're true, and they're kind of reflect value systems that I think are easy to agree on and to kind of sign to. Also as a non-Indigenous person, because they basically say, well, but in a positive way, they say nourish and respect what ensures your livelihood, and like don't destroy nature, because I mean, not in the most positive way. And Western societies always give it a negative touch, like everything has to be competitive. And as I intuitively also said, don't do this, don't do this, is a culture of don'ts, and instead of opening up and seeing opportunities in the diversity and in the beauty in functional natural habitats, and seeing the beauty of having a river with fresh water that's not poisoned. And it can yeah. I mean, sometimes when I listen to myself, it sounds very cheesy, but I think everybody agrees with us. Like, this is what we want, and why is it so difficult for Western societies to live along those values? Yeah, this is what I still don't get today, what I was always struggling with throughout my life. And this is why, and also like, thinking again on my grandmother, I've never met my grandfathers, and only one grandmother, so that's why I cannot refer to her. But I mean, it's only 3 or 4 generations ago, also in Western societies, that we were very much aware of such concepts, that you of course would make sure that the patch of land that you own can bear fruits and vegetables next year again, and you won't destroy it. And but this is what societies do nowadays. And so I think we've unlearned very quickly, and I hope we can relearn as quickly as well, because it's necessary. And I think in my belief system, we can only do that with Indigenous communities from across the world, because the knowledge is still there with them, because it's being nourished. And as much as I try to develop a narrative of us instead of they and us and them, so us inclusively of the global society, but I've also learned as a non-Indigenous person, in working with Indigenous colleagues and Indigenous work settings, today there's a need for a narrative of us and them, not versus, but with, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in order to be able to understand what we as Westerners have lost and need to relearn, and also have an opportunity to relearn if we listen carefully. And yeah, there's also always the question for, we have to invite Indigenous communities. I think we need to kind of also revert the concept of, like, we can ask if they want to share with us, and how can we make sure Indigenous communities can trust us again. So I think this needs to happen. And all of these things I touched on now in the first 20 minutes or so. They're very much kind of very close under my skin. So I hope I'm making sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and in a way that it describes you, who you are, and it gives us an insight in the information that goes into the way that you decide to do things. So for that, I'm super grateful for you for sharing that, and going through the step by step. And I think it also it requires a lot of reflection, like you talked about, self-awareness a little bit, to be able to do that. And that only kicks into your life, I would assume, by experience, by experience of yourself, experiences of, for example, your grandmother or your family in general. So in that sense, it makes a lot of sense in a way that it gives us an insight into the person that you are. And I very much thank you for saying that. And it doesn't matter if it's the 15-minute version instead of the 6-minute version. Like it sets you up actually for people to understand you better. The better you introduce yourself, the better people understand. So for that, I highly, very much appreciate you for that. There's also some things that you said that triggered me a little bit. You found it's a word of choice that once you say it, I'm like, bing, the light bulb goes off in my head.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of things, but it started off with, you found your mission. Could you explain how you found that mission, and if so, like, what is your mission, if you can articulate it in any way?
I think I can try.
Sure.
Now that you mirror that back at me, I'm like, whoa, okay, what did I
Sorry about that.
No, please. I mean, it's more than fair of you challenging me on that.
It's not challenging though. It's just interested.
In a positive way.
Yeah.
Like with many words, we have this connotation, which are often connotations that are either or, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Anyway, so I'm glad you asked that. What is my mission? So, okay, there's no easy way to say that without stepping into whichever trap. So, okay, I studied biology, and then towards the end of my studies, the question was, I did a study in Germany, then I transitioned to Sweden. I learned about the Swedish way of life. I also have Swedish relatives, so I could kind of get to know a different culture, which was still Western, but less dense as Germany is. So they also have Sami people, as we know, and yeah, but the kind of modern Swedes, like the Sami, don't play much of a role in modern Swedish life from when I was there.
Okay.
Which, well, of course, is sad and alarming also to a certain extent, knowing our friends. But yeah, these are realities. this was my reality, my perspective when I was there for a couple of years. Of course, for some Swedes, they have closer ties to their history, their nation's history, and also, probably friends for Sami. I also have Swedish Sami friends from before my work at the Youth Caucus. Yeah, but where was I? So, and then I was I was always torn inside myself between human rights activism or saving the world kind of drive, or rescuing animals from torture and mistreatments, versus my interest for biology and building a profession around that, or like pursuing a career in research and science. So I applied for PhD positions after my undergrad studies. And then I got an invite to New Zealand to check the place out. And I also have some relatives in Australia. And then I made this basically my world journey at my early 20s. I put my savings, I got a little bit of support from family members, and there was basically my world trip at early my, anyways. So yeah, and this is where, like I mentioned my interest of Native Americans and the indigenous, but then going to New Zealand and Australia and traveling along the east coast of Australia and seeing at the time, so this was in the early 2000s, no, at the transition from 99 to 2000. This is 20 years ago, really? Like what?
I know, I get that.
Yeah, so a long time ago, I was in Australia and I traveled down the coast, and I was also in New Zealand, and I met Aborigines and Maori people, and I spoke with them, and I was shocked. I was like, how can it be that in a country as known and as like presumably positively reputed as Australia can treat their own people so badly? Like, what is going on in this world? And then I started thinking and doing some online research, like, wait a minute, but don't we also have indigenous communities in Europe? And how are they doing, by the way? Whoa, okay. And this is then after a 2.5 months trip down under, and then also encounters in New Zealand, where I met a female taxi driver who was half Maori, and my son is a quarter Maori. And he came back from school one day, she told me on the drive home, and was kind of upset because apparently he got picked on for being Maori. So he was basically treated racist by his friends or people his age. He was around 16. And he was saying to his mother, like, oh, these Maori, like trying to distinguish himself as not Maori. And she was shocked, like, how can you say that? Look into the mirror, like, you are Maori. And how can you say such a thing? And that's like, she shared that with me, because I think it happened like the day before. And I also shared my impressions of what I've seen on my journey and how like unsettling that was for me. And yeah, basically anyways, it was an intense conversation. And what shook me also was that she's not seen or spoken to many white people who are so reflective. And I was like, but that shouldn't be so far-fetched to reflect on these things and to see them as not right. So then I felt kind of, okay, that's basically it intrigued me in a way. So I was like doing some online research, and that's how I found Survive International, the organization, and I basically started working with them, and also took up a PhD position in Germany again after a long quest. The job in New Zealand didn't turn out for various reasons, and also felt a little bit too far from home, like literally at the other end of the world. I was like, whoa, this is far. It's like almost as being on the moon, it felt like. But that way I pursued both the career in science and could kind of advocate for human rights issues. And the beautiful thing, what I thought at the time, and I think still today, what Survive International is, they understand themselves as similar to Amnesty International, and they make clear, and this is what I've learned, which I'm still learning from, or which I'm still kind of living and trying to implement every day. So they said, we are not speaking on behalf of the people, we're their voice, because otherwise they're not being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And Survive International is primarily working with indigenous communities that otherwise really don't have a voice in their communities, and they don't have, or didn't at the time have, representatives in the parliament or in any official, they didn't have their own organization, so they needed an organization that sort of spoke on their behalf and still not. So, and they collected money to enable the people to speak on their own behalf, and this is what I felt makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
This is also what I heard echoing in conversations at the Permanent Forum a lot. Like that indigenous communities and individuals are tired of white people, of Westerners talking on their behalf, instead of, why don't you guys invite us to the table? And again, like I want to reinforce what I said earlier. I think like we need to get to a paradigm shift is where we are asking to join indigenous tables instead, or to kind of meet in the middle or something,
Mm-hmm.
but not to have a perception where it says that Western nation or heads of state are inviting an indigenous representative to express their concerns.
Mm-hmm.
No, we need consultation like on eye level. And yeah.
Was that the mindset that brought you, because you also work with IPACC, the in Africa Coordination Committee, and also your work at the because that's where we met at the Permanent Forum for the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. Did that also, was that the mindset that you had to start working with IPACC and the Youth Caucus?
Yeah, so I got to IPACC on a scholarship I received from Germany, from the German Academic Service, German Academic Exchange Service, not DAD, which some know is a different organization, still scholarly. And here the idea was, and still is, to kind of bring scholars of some sort. So an undergraduate degree is good enough to, like some professional degree, to join international organizations like the United Nations departments and programs, or embassies, like these kinds of level. International nonprofits,
Mm-hmm.
like WWF and Amnesty, whichever. So I applied for that scholarship for a 1-year program, and I had to basically write a proposal. And my proposal was at the time, and that was still not in mainstream media, but it was already concerned, or it just started to become mainstream, climate change. So again, we are talking almost 20 years ago, or literally 20 years ago. But that was in 2009. So now we're 10 years ago only, we made a decade shift. So climate change was already, like, since long in the news for scientists, but it's only starting to become a news item on media and around politics. So I submitted a proposal which is of the title, "The Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Times of Climate Change." And that brought me basically to Nairobi with the United Nations Environment Program for climate change adaptation. And within that department, I was able to pursue the project and to do desk research and also visit communities around Kenya. For consultations and to learn about what is it like under the threat of climate change and what are the strategies to compensate and for indigenous communities. And this is then how my second internship was after or in between UNEP was with IPACC in Cape Town. And with IPACC, I came to the Permanent Forum. So they have a delegation for the African caucus or caucus members, and yeah, Hindu is there, and many Kanyinka I met there, and yeah, many of our friends. Yeah, and that basically brought the African perspective into my life. And also with Africa, I was, since a kid, was fascinated by the continent, but I was also shocked by the media coverage. Oh, we're running. I just checked the time. We're already so far in, and it's still the beginning of my life story. But okay, so yeah, so this is how I got to Africa. I was scared because some friends and family members of mine had traveled to Africa as tourists, and I think tourism is also, of course, important for economies and to make sure, yeah, that nations make the money to keep their societies going, which we now painfully realize also during lockdown phases around the world. And also Berlin would be, or is literally broke as a city if it wasn't for tourism. So I know how important that is, but for myself, I didn't want to go, poverty sightseeing, basically, is a word that comes to mind when I think about, oh, I'm going to Africa for holidays. Like, what?
Right.
And of course, now that I've been there, why not? I mean, sure, but the images that we had in Germany or in Europe of Africa is either beautiful landscape or like to the extreme, and nothing in between. And then I went there, and yes, I saw both, and the in between,
right,
which is normal for Kenyans, for Ghanaians, for yeah. And then I started a blog out of that experience, and then coming back and then trying to explain to my friends what it is like to be in Africa, either Kenya or South Africa and here and there. And then they didn't get it because they were so imprinted by what the media portray. I was like, what? Like, this needs to change. And then I started a blog which is called African Perspectives, where I wanted to, basically the mission here was also to let Africans tell their own stories and to curate really African perspectives, not to write about Africa and African livelihoods, but to let Africans on the continent kind of share their stories, or just resharing what's happening on the continent in a positive sense, without ignoring the challenges which are obviously there, but also to portray the normal that's happening. And that was like when I'm not saying I started all of this, it was one of very few channels that kind of made the effort. You will find a lot of diaspora news coverage by people who had left the continent like long time ago, and then also have a diverted image of their home countries, which is also not the reality that's happening on the continent. So that's also something that I realized. But it's not for me to judge, it's just like, for me, the way forward is to basically enable and to find ways for reconciliation. And yeah, and now I'm basically working with a team of Africans from across the continent and the diaspora to increase the discoverability of African research output. And that's a whole chapter on its own. But maybe, yeah, I hand over to you also now again. But similar to that, I would like to find a way and to help to increase the discoverability of indigenous research output, which is increasingly coming to the scholarly knowledge base. And with scholarly, I mean the Western scholarly knowledge base. And also with Afric Archive is the African specific program. There we also have well, not only me, and also like all team members, I think, agree with me, and one or two in particular also pursuing project development around that, to bring together Western scholarship with traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, and this is where it comes in handy, what I've learned at the Permanent Forum, with mechanisms like the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, like UNDRIP, and FPIC, of course, free, prior, and informed consent, which is not, well, it must be way more than that. So we need to go beyond consent. We need to, or I would like to see a world where both have equal weights, basically.
Right.
And what I'm also trying to, or what we as a team are trying to pursue, is decolonization of academia, which is also a buzzword these days, and it needs to happen on multiple levels. And I think we can also, I think a lot of is already happening for decolonization from an indigenous perspective, especially in Canada, Australia, and now like slowly also increasingly from other parts of the world. And I'm thinking around about the subjects of cultural studies. With IPACC, we are hosting literature that is primarily from African scholars, but also by non-African scholars who research about African topics. And there, of course, sooner or later, we would also host content that is of cultural and African studies. And there you would find literature that looks very similar to animal behavior studies, where people go to villages and talk to elders or any community member without or with their consent, take pictures, take the data, and publish it in the West.
Right.
So what's the benefit for the community then? Other than they've given an interview, they lost time they could otherwise have used for harvesting or hunting or chilling with family members. So the question of compensation for the effort and for sharing the knowledge is a whole different, like, necessary conversation to have, which is also increasingly happening, and also still not today.
Right.
Unfortunately, and this needs, like, I will hope I can also contribute my part in helping to change that. Oh, did I say I give you?
No, there's just before we continue, African Perspectives, your blog, is that still active? That people can.
I mean, the link
watch?
is still there.
All right, yeah.
So African I can share the link. So
yeah, definitely, so that I can put them in the show notes. It would be very interesting to read. See it as a time capsule of things of what you just now shared. And I think you already answered in a way one of the questions that people sent in. Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more on it. Is one of the questions was, why is there a gap between researchers and Indigenous peoples, and how can we overcome that gap? So you already talked about it. Decolonizing academics. Anything in terms of ideas that you might have, or in terms of like tactics or methods that people can use, or that you would like to see, or is already happening to help overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, you find where many Western scholars, I'm not sure how big the numbers, if I say many, but many, I would say the most Western scholars would intuitively question indigenous or traditional knowledge as kind of valid research, because they think it's not, they would probably argue that it's not, it hasn't followed methodologies that are accepted in the Western system. The thing with open science now is, and here's where it gets interesting, the open science movement is basically unveiling the flaws in modern research. And there's a lot of flaws. A lot of scientists are also trying their best and doing good research for, in many cases, also for the betterment of the planet and of societies and whatever subjects they're studying, to improve the situation and to, you know, yeah, often also for just for research sake, because doing research is fun. It's kind of answering one question and then coming up with 3 or 5 new ones, and so it's basically a continuous quest for knowledge, and that's exciting on its own. But many scientists also start research, for like value-based, because they have a family member who got sick, so they dive into cancer research or whatever. Or they lost a family member or friend to whatever disease, and this is why they now study that disease. So where was I? So yeah, but I mean, as we know, like indigenous knowledge, it has been passed on from one generation to the next and is based on facts, is based on experiences. And Hindu also makes great cases with the climate change movement and making sure that indigenous individuals and representatives are part of these discussions by arguing, rightly so, that we know that because we've observed it, and how else is that, like, what is it if that's not science-based, basically, argumentation? I mean, maybe not as rigid, but it can always be backed up with whatever established methodology. And this is not happening enough, perhaps. And then the question of ownership comes also into play. So if, so what basic knowledge is being shared, under what circumstances, and then does it need scientific backing? And then once that happens, who owns the knowledge? And I think this is where Jon Drip makes clear, the declaration makes clear, of course, whoever contributes, and also the open science movement has come up with standards and best practices to ensure everybody's contribution must be acknowledged. So of course, also that of indigenous communities, if they share their knowledge and to what extent and how do they contribute, must be acknowledged and must be also compensated monetarily or otherwise that makes sense for the community. So that's one reason for a gap. And then another argumentation is that it's often mixed with religious or whatever belief systems, maybe not religion per se, but now it's often confused with voodoo and but also, like, Western science is also not free of political will and is not free of religious belief systems, and it continues to undergo pressure points that are, for the most part, unknown or unconscious by the majority. So yeah, I don't buy these arguments. Of course, there need to be checkpoints. How much can we say is a fact and how much is interpretation? But you have interpretation in every research study, like Western scholar standards as well. Like we cannot, there's no absolute knowledge also in Western scholarly standards. We can only assume that based on the methodology we apply, whatever we learn from the experiment or from the thought experiment for humanities is a reality, but we cannot be 100% sure. And this is where the scientific discourse happens and everybody acknowledges that. So why question indigenous knowledge then?
Right.
But yeah, these are also belief systems people are trapped in and they find it difficult to open up to something they don't know. I think it's also a reflex.
Like, by the sounds of it, like what you're talking about, what you're working with, the open science community is something that indigenous peoples should be looking more into in terms of support, in terms of making use of that, the ideology infrastructure that of the open science infrastructure. Am I getting that right?
Yes, I think, yeah, absolutely, because and it's already happening. So there, it's happening in the research. What is it? RDM research. Data management is a topic where indigenous communities have been consulted already. also from different world regions. So with research data management, here we're talking basically experimental results, the numbers that scientists come up with, which need to be archived in a database, and where and how should that database be curated. And I think it was in 2016 only, so it's still quite recent. The FAIR standards were developed, and FAIR stands for F-A-I-R, findable. So research data must be findable, so online preferably, must be accessible by anyone. So once you have internet connectivity, you must be able to access the data and see the data. And the R stands for, so basically why that is, so the accessibility is important because much data is either not being published. So like there's claims outside or in a research article which have no backing to the reader. So the reader cannot go to the data to verify whatever the authors claim is true based on what data they've put together. But this is now changing, that data sets must be published alongside the research article. Or it's behind a paywall that you have to pay to access the data set or the research article, and yeah, then it's not accessible for monetary reasons. So so we are findable, accessible, and then I stands for interoperable, so that different data sets must be also archived in a way that are machine readable and human readable, and machine readable to potentially bring them to a state where they can be made interoperable, so read by other machines. Like if you have it on a computer in, I don't know, in Amsterdam currently, then a scientist from Nairobi must also be able to access the data and read it, so that the different computing mechanisms are interoperable with each other. So that basically, which is not the case for the most part. And it's not the case because different computation systems have evolved in different places for different specific disciplines. And therefore makes sense that we have a very diverse and complex network and basically situation and ecosystem. But now, like the open science community agreed to standards to find ways to make these things interoperable with each other.
Right.
Finally, the R of FAIR stands for reproducible. So whatever data set is being published must be published in a way that anyone, anywhere in the world can reproduce the same data sets with the same set of methodologies, approaches, and kind of research questions that were asked. And then now where indigenous communities came in, they said, well, this is not enough. We also need other aspects to come into play. And so a group of researchers and indigenous representatives who are also researchers came up with the CARE standards. And now CARE stands, or CARE principles, and CARE, C-A-R-E. And CARE stands for, C stands for collective benefit, A for authority and to control, R for responsibility, and E for ethics. So these were basically the value or the principles that were brought into the FAIR system by indigenous representatives.
Right.
And I, like in my courses, I always teach both alongside with each other, and I tell all my students and participants, like one cannot be without the other, and research should and must be value-based if we want to make it work for a global scientific community or scholarly community, and also a global community as a whole. Because now with the threats of climate change on a global scale, migration is a global challenge for various reasons. So people migrate for various reasons, and often under troubling circumstances, and now the pandemic. Like if it's meant for the greater good, then of course we also need those CARE principles. And yeah, so
Right.
Yeah, so I think basically this is how indigenous knowledge can not only find its place in the scholarly system, but yeah, I don't know. Like, I hope we find, like, within my lifetime, I hope we'll see kind of a merger of the two and a mutual respect of the two.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a thank you so much for sharing it, because there's not, when Indigenous peoples, when we're confronted with science databases, we immediately gravitate towards academia.edu. Obviously that's not the whole infrastructure that we're looking at the moment. So like it is helpful to have to have options, of platforms out there that we can use, or to our benefits, making sure that that gap between scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge, that it disappears, that there's equity and equality between the two. And it could start obviously with of a platform that respects Indigenous people's rights, and when it comes to our knowledge. And so it's very helpful to have this as a like a tool in our toolkit, right? Like as something that can benefit us a lot. And I think I'll be looking at, I'll read more into it about the open science platform, and hope and see if there's any way that Indigenous peoples can contribute in it. Johanna, like there's something that I know about you, and this is another question that people have asked, is your passion maybe for interspecies communication. You have your dog with you, so interesting to know what people would be interested in is how can we better learn or communicate with the animal world.
Okay, that's it's not a whole different conversation, but it can also be a very lengthy one. I need to correct myself with FAIR principles only because I said that the R stands for reproducible, whereas for data sets, it usually stands for reusable. Mm-hmm. Reproducibility is also important, but it's for a different angle of open science. And reusability means that whatever data set is being generated can also be repurposed for a different scientific question, which makes a lot of sense, especially if we think about animal testing. And here's where the bridge to your question now. So a lot of medical research and also bioscience research goes to animal testing. So it comes on a sacrifice by laboratory animals, or which is an ethical question every researcher needs to ask him or herself. Is this something that I really can do for this in the name of science, to kill and to torture other beings? So reusability makes sense to also, and open science, like more transparency in research, helps us to become more ethical also with animal research. Mm-hmm. But okay, to your question, so interspecies communication was a little bit of a joke, but also from my own experience of working with dogs and horses, I've learned a whole lot from engaging with horses, not only horseback riding, but natural horsemanship or natural horsewomanship in my case. Horse whispering, what some also call it, which is not so much whispering, but the trick with horsemanship is basically that you learn to read the horse, how it acts in its environment, and to accept and respect it for what it is. And it is is a beautiful creature. It's also a prey potentially, so it needs to be on alert every second of its life. Other than dogs, dogs are hunters. Dogs are, carnivores. Dogs kill, and that's what they do. And they don't have many predators on their own neck, so mm-hmm. they can chill a lot. So that's why they sleep a lot during the day, and they're quite relaxed. While horses, they're always on alert. And so it's a whole different life concept that a horse lives under as compared as dogs and cats. What was the question? So what can we learn from it?
Yeah, how can we better learn or communicate? Probably better communicate, probably, or
I
learn
think,
from the animal world.
yeah, I think that's also what I kind of become aware of through my interest in indigenous kind of communities and livelihoods, is that, yeah, to respect first of all, and then to observe. And also many of the horse whisperers, or so-called horse whisperers, they went to the wilderness, they observed wild animals, wild horses, like the mustangs in the yeah, wherever, like around Arizona, well, not in the city obviously, but in, yeah, so basically in the natural habitat, to observe how different species engage with each other. And like under the hashtag interspecies communication on Twitter and on Facebook, you find a lot of fun situations. There's also common miscommunication between different species, because body language is a whole lot different between a predator and a prey animal. And well, already between cats and dogs, I think is what many are familiar with. But also, dogs wagging the tail doesn't necessarily mean the dog is happy. And this can easily be misinterpreted both by humans and by other dogs as well. They're still young.
What does it say then if they wag the tail?
Depends how they wag it, and
Okay.
it's very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Most body languages are so subtle you can hardly see them. But it can also mean like, wait a minute, like if you go one step further, I'll bite you. And it's a clear warning, like it's anxiousness or like tension, and it can flip easily. But it's a warning sign also to the other dog. And if they've learned to read that sign. And for horses, like there's always often you hear, oh, the horse acts unpredictably. But if you learn how to read the horse, you can see it coming long before whatever happens. Like long before the horse kicks, it tells you with his body language, like the way it opens his eyes, the way it's kind of moving its ears, that it's uncomfortable or not, or, you know. And sometimes that goes very quick, because again, horses have to act quickly, because otherwise they fall to prey. But oftentimes you have like not a minute, but several seconds to react and to kind of reassess the situation and act accordingly to keep everybody safe. And humans, like us humans, we often don't take the time to read animals' body language, because I mean they don't have vocal language as diverse as humans have, right? So they need to communicate multiple levels, and we also communicate non-verbally way more than we are aware of. And our brains perceive that, but we are not conscious about it so much. But this can be learned, and this is also how, like with leadership training, you find a lot of leadership trainers who work with animals, either dogs or horses. It's quite common. Or, you know, some, like I have a colleague here in Germany who works with wolves. Not that she keeps wolves, but she takes her clients to a reserve where, and there you can also not see, because the reserve is usually too small for the wolves to really display their natural interaction. But the encounter with the wolf, and to sit there and observe them, even when they're just sleeping or, you know, walking around, seemingly doing not much to nothing. Yeah, it basically forces us to observe and to reflect and to think and to be humble. And kind of, yeah, I think observation has a lot to do with humbleness, and to acknowledge that there's something as or more important than ourselves.
Right. I think that's it's not an angle that I would think about, but it's now that you mention it, it makes so much sense actually. Like the whole interspecies communication, and like, yeah, observation is something that people observing and listening. That's what people should do a lot more these days. And it's not not just obviously with the animal world, obviously, but also in the line of work that we do, Hindu, myself, observing and listening can be very much more helpful than to assume and to dictate in a bit. Sorry, I'm interpreting whatever you said and trying to.
Oh, yeah, you have all the rights to do so, of course.
Within yeah. But it makes so much sense now. And also, like, I've had a brief flash to when you talked about like the yeah, quote unquote nonverbal the movements of animals. It can be so telling, and you can that there's like, are you on TikTok? Because I saw on TikTok there's animal chiropractor. I've never known that there's an animal chiropractor until I watched him like adjust horses' backs and necks, and then people assume that these animals are fine, but all of a sudden when they adjust these animals' backs or necks, like they like feel so much better. Like I'm so, there's so much that we don't know yet about the animal world. That and to me, the trigger was watching TikTok videos about an animal chiropractor. I sound kind of stupid actually bringing this up in this but like,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I also saw something online the other day, like a snippet of a report or show where, like, if you think about dogs, and the sad reality is, like, we're forcing dogs to our livelihood. So you find most dogs in cities to have to spend like 6 to 8 to 12 hours on their own, lonely. And dogs are pack animals, so it's torture for them. And the owners don't know what torture the dog's going through. And that's so sad when you think about it. And there was a study, here comes scholarly knowledge, by a British research team who put cameras into people's homes to show their owners, or to observe what the dogs do while their owners are away for several hours, often more than 10. And the dogs are anxious. They're anxiously waiting because their security person is gone. They're left to themselves. It doesn't matter how many dogs there are in the house. If the pack leader is out for hunting, they know they're under threat. And their heart rate goes up, they're stressed, it's not that they sleep, the owners often think, oh, my dog just sleeps at home and wait, like, so happy when I'm coming back. But the opposite is the case. Like, the whole time they're anxiously waiting for their owner to come back, and doesn't get better over the time. And then they have to live that life for a lifetime, like constantly stressed. And anyways, this is not the reality for all dogs, luckily. I'm also like freelancing. Sometimes I have to leave the dogs alone for an hour or two. I also have like another person in the household, so there's always somebody around. And I think you can also train a dog to relax a bit more. But you need to do that. So you need to prepare the dog to be able to stay on their own. And this is something that I think many dog owners in cities don't have a clue about. Whereas if you live in the countryside and you have a dog watching the yard or then the dog has a task. And also animals are happy when they have a purpose in life or in the family. And you find that also in horses, they want to work for their food and for, they want to have rewards for things they do well. And and then when they have something to do, then they have a purpose, and then it's okay. It's like keeps them busy, right? But just sitting and waiting for your owner to come back home to feed you again and to work for 5 minutes, like, that's not good enough. That's not a cool life. But yeah, this is basically the reality. So basically what I'm trying to say is we need to also, in Western societies, or I think modern societies, wherever in the world, we need to stop shaping the world to our needs or what we think we need, because it also doesn't make us happy, as we know. Like, what makes us happy is to be in the woods. Like it's funny how city people always crave for recreation in the forest, or to go for hiking and seek the adventure like far, far away, and then just to come back and be a wheel in the system again.
Mm-hmm.
And we force plants and animals to share that livelihood with us. And
Yeah,
they
yeah.
won't ask to participate. They just
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of, I don't know.
I read somewhere, I read it was a tweet maybe from someone, but it was kind of disturbing. I never thought of that way. And that person claimed that dogs actually suffer from Stockholm Syndrome. So, like,
I don't know. Was there an explanation for the
no,
point?
it's a tweet. So there's only like so many characters that you can use. But like basically is the why dogs are so attached to people is because they suffer from Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah,
I
throughout
think that
life.
was, I don't know, like when you think about it, like if it's true or not, but like the idea that dogs are considered like man's best friend, right? Like like human's best friend, but there's actually a whole layer to it, undercurrent to it, that is actually what that person would describe as Stockholm syndrome. Like
Yeah, I don't know if
disturbing.
it's something, but it's always puzzling how a dog would still be loyal to an owner who beats them up every day and who's kind of seemingly unjust. But maybe they have a certain bond on some level. Like who is there to judge that? And yeah, but some yeah, dog human couples are sad to watch, but you know, if it, I also like the one that you saw earlier. She's sleeping now by my feet. She's a rescue from an elderly lady. She was heavily not mistreated, but neglected
Okay.
with the lady. So the lady got old. She probably suffered from dementia, and she had a dog, and both got like neglected by, I don't know if she, well, if she still has family or neighbors, but nobody's looking after them. So the dog had rotten teeth. To the degree that, you know, I don't know the English word, but blood and whatever came out of her mouth, so like seriously rotten.
Mm-hmm.
And the vet was surprised that the dog would still look well fed, so almost not overweight, but like still okay, like from nourishment point of view. But she must have been in so much pain. It was like, I wouldn't be able to eat with teeth like that. Like somehow, but they had each other. And I think that's more important than anything. And dogs are social animals, and humans as well, and our horses. So I think as long as there's some bond, like maybe that's good enough to, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
Well.
and what's the alternative? To put the dog to sleep? Like to kill
Oh.
it?
Okay.
I don't know. And also what I said earlier, it's better for a dog to have a home than sitting in a shelter. And the
Obviously.
shelter can be as good as whatever, but it's not a home. And I've taken in many dogs from shelters, and they've changed personality within a day. Like it's crazy. As soon as you give somebody a little love and a home, they change, like, and they become their own selves again, and that's beautiful to watch. It's also sad to see that the transition is necessary, but it's rewarding to see that you can have a little creature find back to life, or to a decent life, kind of thing.
Right. No, to think it's such a fascinating conversation. I would never imagine that I would have a conversation about animals in this yeah, in the live show, in the Q&A show. But come to think of it, it is such a interesting conversation, and there's many overlaps, many relevancies in having this conversation. And I learned a lot as well in terms of interspecies communication. Not only dog human, but also like horses human and everything else. So in that sense, really much appreciate for you for you bringing that up, and then people for asking that question as well, because otherwise I would never have asked you this question. So people that are watching, listening, very much appreciate for you guys for it. Final question, Joe, because obviously you have a lot of more things to do than to sit down and yarn with me about life and everything else. But so far, I really love this conversation. What I would like to know, but luckily people as well, is what do you want to be remembered for the most?
Oh, that's another question. Right?
Yeah.
Am I that old already? I don't know. I like, funny enough, I asked myself the question early in my life, like, if I have an impact, what would that be? And how? I mean, I think I didn't ask the question so much for myself, but like, again, my great grandmother to close the circle on her, she was also called Johanna, also German pronunciation, Johanna. Which is probably also why her legacy is weighing so much on my shoulders, because I carry her name. Thanks, Mom. But
okay.
But I'm also grateful because it made me the person I am today, and it could be worse. Like, looking into
you could not be alive today.
Yeah.
So in that sense, like the chances of you being born is went to, like, I don't know, 400 trillion is what people said. So
yeah,
in that sense, it could be worse. Yeah.
True.
But sorry, let's continue.
But what's basically burned in my head is the letter she left when she knew she would be killed the next day. And she wrote to her sister and the family. Where her sister, my grandma, had one daughter by then, so my mom was alive. And she wrote a long letter of what she was fighting for and the whole family was fighting for. And she knew, okay, now it's taking the ultimate sacrifice. And she signed the letter with, I will live on in your memories. And I mean, it's easy to say that of a deceased person, but for somebody to say that about themselves is a different perspective. And it basically shook me also to the bones. And I think this is why it's important to me it was also frightening. I've read on her stories, I've read a little bit about like what actually she did, and like there's quite a bit of documentation of what she did. A lot was also destroyed by the Nazis, but whatever was there, much of that I've read, not everything, because it was also easily getting too much to process what that means, and having a family member who made that sacrifice, like for the greater good, for people we don't even know, putting the family's well-being on the line. So I don't know. The question is, I don't know if it's necessary to be remembered, to be honest. I think it's important to be remembered by the people that are closest to you. But maybe the greater good is more important. And I think we're like, collectively, we can basically make sure that the next generation can inherit a planet that's worthwhile living in, or that's possible to live in the first place.
Is it more important for you to make an impact over being remembered for something?
I don't know. I mean, it's easily. I think I'm afraid of being seen as a narcissist, like the Trump kind of person. That's an extreme.
There's a very long distance between Trump and you, Joe.
Anybody else, really. But no, I don't know. I think I'm also like, there's also, I wanted to mention also the problem of white saviorism, and I try not to fall in that trap. And of course, I'm easy to fall in the trap as a white person. So also how much is still okay to speak on behalf, to open the doors or to enable. Because some of that needs to happen for my people, like the other white people around me or the other Westerners that I know, to open up and to hear about that Indigenous. Like I've had many close colleagues that I liked a lot and I almost call my friends when I mentioned the work I did for Survival International and what was going on. It's like, but come on, Indigenous peoples, they've died long ago. They only live in reserves these days. They don't exist anymore the way I see them. It's like, who do you think the people I work with are? Like what? Like people have no clue what's going on. And not people in general, but many, surprisingly many people that are also presumably sensitive to social issues, to cultural diversity, that they want to be good, whatever that means. And yet they also tend to be ignorant. I think we all have our causes that we fight for. So yeah, what do I want to be remembered for? I think, well, to fight the good fight is also a constant struggle with ourselves, I think. Not to overstep, not to be too negative as we fight, because that can also be counterproductive. But of course, we need still to fight and to speak up when there's need for somebody to speak up. And the more, the better, because then it's also when it has an impact.
Right.
I think like what's actually now starting to happen is that people started telling me that I'm having a positive influence and then I'm enabling them to also speak up on similar causes, like to speak up for diversity, to feel encouraged that they have a similar way of thinking and to feel encouraged like by what I say and webinars or here and there. Conferences that this is also what I think is important. Thanks for mentioning that. Now I feel encouraged to do the same, and this is good. Like this is really nice to see that, like to be able to enable other people to continue the fight that we are fighting.
How does that make you feel when people reach out to you and give these remarks, reflections on your contributions?
It's satisfying, but not, well, partially satisfying, because it also, like, then I also start immediately question myself, did I really say the right thing? And but yeah, I mean, of course it makes me happy in a way, and it's reassuring that whatever I'm doing to some degree has a positive impact, and that's cool. And yeah, so I think that's good. I also know that like working with a diverse team is a lot of work, and to enable constant mentoring, and that's hard work, which is normally unpaid for. Well, in my reality is usually unpaid for. And so I struggled to sustain my livelihood, and that imbalance is difficult to carry. Also as a woman in a dominantly white society. But I think I found some balance in myself, with the community that I live in, with the people in my family, self-chosen and inherited. Like, I think it's important for us to ground ourselves so that we can become the role models for others. What is it to grow an army? Sounds so materialistic, but you know what I mean, like to grow a community for the greater good fight, for the fight for the greater good. Yeah.
No, I think you are super, and like we've been talking for over an hour now, and you're super humble in everything that you say and everything that you do. And throughout the conversation, I think my mind always goes, all right, always goes into like, I'm trying to pick out like, what is this person's mindset, like what are the intentions, and like your intentions are good, you know. You have been very, you've done a lot for Indigenous peoples, and you've done a lot for yourself. You've done a lot for your field of work, for your interests, for your family as well, but by just doing what you do. And having said that, you can very much like, because I can feel you, that humbleness, that humility. I can see that you're also trying to be very careful about like, right, saying with what you say, and what you say and do not say. And there's this whenever things that you can be proud of, you should be proud of, because you have made an impact to people. You haven't made an impact to the movement. You haven't made an impact to the Indigenous peoples in Africa, to the Youth Caucus, and everyone else. So that's something you can be proud of. And so in that sense, you're making an impact in everything that you do. So 100%, I would encourage you to keep on doing what you're doing, and yeah, and just whenever you feel that fear of judgment, that chip on your shoulder, you know, because we all have that. I have that as well. Like just think about like your intentions were good, you know, like you wanted to make an impact, a positive impact. You have your mind on, you have your head on right. So in that sense, cheers to you, Johanna, like for whatever you did, have done, and what you're doing, and what you're about to do, and into the future. So don't feel the need to apologize for that, or be, because yeah, like it's, when, you know, like you're doing something great, you know, doing something good, you know. So, and we should, instead of judging that, we all should be championing that, you know, and champion, celebrate the people that are doing it. So hopefully this, and this is what I also wanted to do with having you on the show. Yeah, just to pick your brain a little bit, have you talk about whatever you do and want to talk about, you know, because it gives an insight in the person that you are, and gives context to like a capsule around what you're doing, so that people understand, oh yeah, this is Johanna, and I really dig what she's doing, because she is, because she has the right intentions, you know. So yeah, that's what I just wanted to share. I love you for what you're doing, and you as a person. And whenever, yeah, like we chat, we have WhatsApp numbers, like we can always like continue conversations. And yeah, whenever people are like who is this person, like trying to judge you, like, hey, send them to me, please. Like I have no problem yeah, supporting, defending people that I believe in, that I've worked with, that I yeah, appreciate for whatever they do.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, it sounds like a monologue kind of thing, like an ending of a conversation.
Thanks very much. It's good encouragement, and yeah, it's good to see that that my work is appreciated and can be appreciated by people that I also look up to. By the way, because yeah, and of course I also make mistakes, and I think it's human.
It's human, yes.
Make mistakes, and this is when I also apologize to people in my team, to people in my family. It's difficult to apologize to family members. It's easier to apologize to team members. I can't tell you so much, but yeah, I think it also is part of the journey that is called life, and yeah, in that sense, yeah, makes a lot of sense of what you say. So sometimes I'm in my own way, but I also want to kind of question myself with every step that I take, knowing about the privileges that I have, and also being underprivileged as a woman in the society, but still very much privileged as well. And
Like,
yeah, so like I set out this when I was looking for like what you also asked, not to make this a very long monologue again, but so what is my mission in life? So I figured that as I think, like for me, when people ask me about my career choices or why do it, so for me it's very much value based and value driven, and it has to be for the person that I am, the person that my family and my family's legacy made me, and the nation that I was brought up in, one of which fell apart. So yeah, I mean, another identity is also an interesting conversation. Maybe we can have another episode down the line at some point, because this is like what I've seen is that many indigenous people have identity crisis when they grew up in Western societies and also want to or see themselves as indigenous. So that, in a sense, like I have a little bit of that. Like when people ask me, like, "Are you East or West German?" It's still a question that I keep being asked. Not so much often anymore, but and I'm either or both, and that's okay. And this is also a conclusion that I think people like Jocelyn came towards, to embrace whatever legacy we inherited and make that our own and put it to best use cases.
sure, yeah. You know, like, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because like you, like at least in my view, once people make mistakes, and I believe me, I've made plenty of them, and I'm sure I will make like truckloads more of them in the future. But I can only applaud mistakes for one reason: you tried. You know, at least you try to do something, whereas other people, they do not try. They just contemplate and try to make it perfect, and perfection, like, it meets procrastination. There's a very close line, fine line between the two. And like, mistakes is like the total tonnage of mistakes that I've made. And I've only been in the movement for 18 years, but I've already made a lot of mistakes, big ones as well. You know, like that could stop probably a freight train maybe. And but you learn, you know, like you adapt, like, right? So yeah, I made a mistake at the UN level, at the General Assembly level. I made that mistake, but I've learned from it, so that I won't make it anymore. It's better than not not going out on a limb, not trying out stuff, because it is important to try out stuff, to taste different things, to try out different things, so you can adapt along the way. So like, might sound strange, Johanna, but I'd love for you to make more mistakes, in a way, in a way of you just keep on trying to do what you do. And I acknowledge your the fear that you have, the concerns that you have, because obviously I cannot speak for a person with the context that you're in. I can only imagine, but like, it's the only thing that I can say, like, knowing you as a person, that yeah, you have the right mindset, and there's always this fear, and there's always judgment will always come around. Like, people will always judge you. You know, there's this, no matter if it's big or small, or good or bad, like, people always judge you. But as long as it feels right, right intentions, positive thing, then yeah, you'll be all right. And again, I'll say it again. If there's anyone that has a problem with that, like, just send it to me, and I'll figure it out the Pacific Indigenous way. Sorry, like, it's to bring that up, but yeah, like, I'm just for my context, I I know that the number of people that, I know for a fact, the number of people that have good intentions when it comes to Indigenous peoples' rights, that pool is a lot smaller than people actually assume. That the people that have the right intentions and want to do what's best for Indigenous peoples, like people think that there's yeah, like it's a lot smaller than people assume. So yeah, so people like yourself and Jocelyn, obviously, like they have the right in the heart, in the minds, in the right place, the mindset, which is in the right place as well. The only thing that I can do is champion them, support them, celebrate them, and help them wherever they go, wherever I can. So yeah, another like semi monologue ending speech or whatever. But yeah, is there anything that you wanted to talk about, but I didn't ask you, or something? Yeah, something along the lines of, oh my God, Ghazali, I cannot believe he did not ask me about it. Something along those lines before we end this episode.
I don't think so. I think we covered everything one way or the other. I think the conversation also doesn't need to end here. I mean, obviously for this episode, yes, but I hope we have many more opportunities to engage in circles and dialogues and also partial monologues or pouncing monologues. Like one hashtag that I saw pop up, which resonates a lot with my daily work, is hashtag stronger together, which I think can be applied well for my work with African Archive, also for our work like with Indigenous representatives and Indigenous peoples allies.
Allies, yeah.
So I try to serve as such the best way I know, and I also, well, promise and commit to continue to learn. Yeah, and try not to speak on behalf continuously, as you know, was like the work that I'm doing now with my African colleagues for African Archive and African Scholarship and discoverability and engagement on that, and to help like for inclusivity and diversity of African scholarship or of global scholarship. So that's also a debate that's happening. I think like I know for a fact that much for that I've learned with the Permanent Forum and like the exchanges we had a decade ago and continue to have. And yeah, it keeps sensitizing me, and I therefore can also sensitize others. And thus we can also learn how we can grow together again, and how we can unlearn some of the destructive patterns that we find ourselves, well, not us, but the system brings to the table to decolonize not only academia but also societies. And it's happening slowly but steadily. And it's with conversations like these and platforms that you provide, to have this discourse in the open and accessible, and for like to invite people like myself and others to contribute. I think speeds up that process drastically, and that's good to see and important to have. So thank you.
No, thank you, and definitely we'll continue this conversation on many other this topic and many other topics, and it's something that pops into my head. I haven't really found a format for that yet, but something that we should talk about is to do something about like decolonizing researchers, kind of a webinar episode, like saga, like how to Indigenous now, kind of thing. That
we can put together kind of a panel if you want. I can dig up some names from the literature and the conversations I've come across, and then we can invite people from other circuits to enable mutual learning processes.
This is interesting. Let's talk about that offline, and then we'll see. Let's put it in a pot, cook it a little bit, and let's see what comes out. Johanna, thank you so much for getting on the show, for talking, sharing thoughts, ideas, and views. I really appreciate it. And yeah, stay safe, stay healthy, stay, well, I wouldn't say stay inside because you have to walk your dog at some point.
Again, luckily I have dogs as an excuse to get outside.
All right, good. And get outside as well. Thank you so much for your time.